So y'all got to help me out. If you can't tell by the color in my beard and the lack of hair on my head, I'm a little bit old. So I need y'all to help me with some stuff. So I need to know what the cool shoes are to have right now. What are the cool shoes? I hear Converse. Nike. All right. Okay. All right. What about clothes? What's the best brand we got? Okay. All right. I got all of that. All right. Couple more. I really need this one. What about like makeup? What's the good brand of makeup? MAC. I have heard of that one. Okay. So first off, there's nothing wrong with cool shoes or cool clothes. So I want to make that clear from up front. But tonight we are continuing in our series called The Chase, where we're looking after things that we chase after, which can become the focus of our lives. Tom started us off a couple of weeks ago talking about the chase after fame. And then last week he talked about chasing after comfort. And again, those things aren't bad on their own, but when they become the focus of our lives, they can be counter to God's will for our lives, and they become sin. So tonight we're continuing in this series, and we're talking about chasing after possessions. Chasing after stuff. And we have a word for this pursuit. It's called materialism. Have y'all heard this word before? Materialism. There it is. Materialism is considering material possessions as the most important thing in your life. And I think we're all probably guilty of that to some level. But it seems like this is a struggle that people y'all's age particularly have. And there's a reason for that, I think. Studies have shown that materialism is actually linked to poor self-esteem. And teenagers tend to be the age group that struggles with self-esteem the most. You see, the worse we feel about ourselves, the more we turn to materialism, to surrounding ourselves with possessions to try to help give us a boost with that. I think this is because you're at school surrounded by people your own age, and there's this tendency to look around, right, to try to compare yourself to the others you see, to know where you stand, to know how good you are. And we feel like we need the coolest shoes, we need the best brand clothes, we need the makeup, we need the purse, or we think we're starting to miss out. Or maybe it's for you, it's the newest electronics, right? And you got to get the new iPhone the moment it drops every month, right? Or you got to have an Apple Watch for both wrists. Or maybe you need the newest gaming console or the newest game that's out there. And when you start to drive, you got to get a new car, right? So the simple need for things like shoes and clothes can turn very quickly into materialism as we start to feel like we have to have these particular things if we want to be a normal person. And y'all, when I was your age, my family didn't have a lot of money. My dad was an insurance salesman and a part-time farmer. So we lived on a farm, and he owned several rental properties. So a lot of our money was actually tied up in those real estate things. So there wasn't a lot of disposable money laying around that me and my brothers could have, all the newest clothes and gadgets. And I remember very clearly as a teenager, I had to buy these shoes from the Walmart that had a name that I'd never heard of before. And it made me really self-conscious. And this was a huge issue for me because I felt like because of that, I didn't fit in. But my dad had this client whose son was a few years older than me. And a couple of times, he gave me and my brothers some of the clothes that he couldn't wear anymore, he didn't want. And I remember one of the best things that I ever got for him was my first ever name brand shoes. They were the Nike Air Pegasus. Y'all got these? Do y'all remember these? Those are super, super cool. And y'all, the problem was though, so I got these fresh shoes. The problem was the guy that I got them from, he had this, you know how people walk differently? He walked on the inside of his feet really bad. And so when I got these shoes, they were slanted really, really bad. And I don't walk like that, so it was a problem, and they hurt my feet and my ankles a lot. And I don't know, I may have done some serious damage to my feet. And I wore them for a year because I had to look cool, right? Now, when I was in school, I couldn't actually, all I could see was the stuff I didn't have. And I totally overlooked things that I did have that other people didn't. When I was in middle school, my dad put in a pool for us at the house, something that none of my other friends had. And that was part of probably why we didn't have all the expensive clothes and toys and shoes, because my dad had put all this money into buying us a pool, but I never thought about it that way, right? Because all I could see was what I didn't have. And that's what this pursuit of possessions looks like. What you have is never enough. So let's look at what Jesus has to say about chasing after possessions. In his most famous sermon that we call the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says this in Matthew 6. It's the verses that Tanner read for us. He says this in 6:19. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So Jesus describes the chasing after possessions in this terms of storing up treasure one place or the other, storing up treasure on earth. So why is that a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing to store up treasure on earth? Well, Jesus walks us through it. The first thing he said was treasure on earth is temporary, right? Look back at verse 19. He says treasure on earth is easily destroyed. First, he mentions moths. So you ever seen a moth? Let me show you a moth. So if you didn't know, because I was talking to Tom about this, apparently Tom didn't know, moths eat your clothes. If you've ever hung a shirt up for a while and you look and there's got little holes in it, but it's not the moths that fly around, it's actually their babies, the larvae. So they lay their eggs, you can't see them, and they eat through your clothes, right? And just like today, in Jesus' time, clothes were very, very sought after, right? They were a big way of displaying your wealth. And so to the people Jesus was talking to, moths were a big concern. Next, Jesus mentions vermin, okay? Rats. Because in Jesus' time, Israel was a farming culture, right? Most people were farmers. And so wealth usually came from having a good harvest of crops, especially grain. And so rats getting into your barns and eating up your stored crops would be like having your wealth be eaten. And this was a constant worry for the people in Jesus' time. With these two things then, Jesus is trying to warn us that all the stuff you care about is extremely temporary, extremely volatile. Clothes wear out and are easily damaged. Crops can spoil or be messed up by rats. And let me tell you something about clothes, right? All those clothes that you have right now, I promise that you'll look back in about 10 years and you'll be like, what was I wearing, right? So let me show you, for example, here's me. So first off, yeah, everyone appreciate how Martha looks the exact same except she has bangs. So this is me and Martha in about 1994. And I was wearing one of the few name brand shirts I had, Duckhead. Y'all remember Duckhead? Leaders, y'all remember Duckhead? Was Duckhead cool? Martha tried to tell me Duckhead was not cool. To me, Duckhead was cool. And that shirt was cool too because on the back it said Duck Tail and it had his tail. But now I look at that and I'm like, it's a little bit cringy, especially my shorts paired with that. All right, enough of that picture. Take that away. Right, so that's what I'm telling you. Those clothes that you're looking at, like I got to have that. In 10 years now, you're going to be looking like, why did I ever wear that? Because clothes are temporary. And you may be like, okay, yeah, clothes, crops, those are temporary. But what about money? Like, that, no rats eating my money. Well, Jesus doesn't leave that out either. He told us, right, thieves can break in and steal. So we can always lose our money. It can always be stolen. So none of the treasures on earth, none of the possessions we chase after are permanent. And I think it's this lack of permanence that actually builds the chase and that pursuit inside of us. Because we always have to be getting more. This is the second thing about treasure on earth that Jesus tells us. It doesn't satisfy. All right, so it's not permanent and it doesn't satisfy. Check this out. Studies have shown that when we ask people that make about $25,000 a year, if we ask them, how much money do you need to be happy? They told us, we need about $50,000. And then in that same study, they went to people that made much more than that. And they were like, people that make $100,000 a year, how much money do you need to be happy? And they said, we need about $200,000 to be happy. So basically what this tells us is that people seem to always want more. People seem to always want like twice as much as what they have. This shows us the goal of earthly treasure is a moving target because no one is ever satisfied with treasure on earth. This is what Jesus calls in Mark 4:19. He calls this the deceitfulness of wealth. He says wealth is deceitful because you're always left wanting more in order to be happy. It acts like if you have me, you will be happy, but you always need more. For example, King Solomon was the richest man alive at his time, and people would come from all over the known world to see his wealth, to see his possessions. But at the end of his life, he wrote this in the book of Ecclesiastes. In Ecclesiastes 5, verse 10, the richest man alive said this: whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. So despite Solomon's great wealth, he always felt like he didn't have enough. And it never satisfies. So not only does the Bible teach us that chasing after possessions will never bring satisfaction, it seems to also be associated with the sin of coveting. When God gave Israel the 10 commandments, the last of the great 10 commandments was this, in Exodus 20, verse 17. God said this: you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. See, coveting, again, this is not a word that we use a lot. You may be like, what the heck does that mean? Coveting, here's our definition. Coveting is a longing for something that someone else has that you don't. And God says this is a sin because we're basically telling God, hey, you aren't taking care of me. What you have given them is better than what you have given to me. You don't have my best interest in mind. When we're constantly chasing after possessions, we're always looking around at others and what they have and we don't. Okay, so that's what Jesus is telling us not to do. Don't store up treasure on earth, but what are we supposed to do? All right, so back to our main passage. Going back to what Jesus said. So he said, don't store up treasure on earth, but what should we do? In verse 20, but store up for yourself treasure in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. So Jesus doesn't just tell us what not to do, he actually gives us something specific to do otherwise. Right? He says, instead of wasting our time trying to store up treasure on earth that doesn't satisfy, what we should be doing and pursuing instead is storing up treasure in heaven. But that's a little bit complex, right? You're like, what does that mean, Dan? Like, how do I store up treasure in heaven? A couple of things. First off, you have to be in a relationship with him, right? To even begin to store up treasure in heaven, you have to actually be going to heaven. And the only thing that gets us into heaven is accepting in faith the sacrifice of Jesus. And by doing that, we begin our initial investment in the treasure of heaven. Okay, then as a Christian, the Bible mentions several heavenly rewards throughout the Bible for Christians who have served God faithfully. These are often described as like heavenly crowns. And in Revelation, it talks about these being presented to believers. And these rewards are all linked to doing work that directly benefits God's kingdom. That's treasure in heaven, doing work that directly benefits God's kingdom. When we tell others about Jesus, we are working for his kingdom. When we pray for people in our lives, we are working for his kingdom. When we encourage people who need help, we are building up his kingdom. And why is treasure on earth then better than treasure in heaven? Sorry, the other way around. Why is treasure on heaven better than treasure on earth? Because unlike treasure on earth, treasure in heaven is eternal. It is permanent. When we invest our time and efforts into helping others come to Jesus and know more about him, we're doing something that is eternal, that is lasting. This is because people will last forever, right? And you may be like, people die, right? People don't last forever. Well, the Bible teaches us that after we die, we will spend eternity either in heaven with God if we have accepted Jesus' sacrifice for our sins, or separated from God in hell if we have not accepted Jesus' work for us. So investing in people, investing in bringing more people into heaven is an investment then in something permanent, something that lasts forever. And since this is such important work, Jesus tells us not to get distracted then with treasure on earth, which doesn't satisfy and doesn't last. Look again at the final verse here in Matthew 6 that we were looking at. What Jesus says about treasure. All right, so he says, don't chase after treasure on earth, chase after treasure in heaven. Why? For this. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So what does that mean? Your heart is where your treasure is. Whatever you're pursuing most, whether it's earthly treasure or heavenly treasure, that is what your focus will be on. If you spend your time and effort pursuing possessions here on earth, that is what your focus will be on. And it's worthless. It won't satisfy. But if we spend our time and effort pursuing Jesus and his kingdom, when we seek to commit all of our resources, our time, our money, our talents into serving him and doing things that point others to him, then we are doing something eternal of lasting worth, which will bring true satisfaction. So as I start to wrap up here, I want to make it clear again, I'm not saying that possessions are inherently evil or that having nice things is bad, and the Bible never says this. And some of y'all may be here tonight and are like, there really are some things that I actually need, right? And that's right. We really do need essential things like food and clothing and a house to live in. So look at what Jesus says just a few verses down from where we were reading before, directly addressing the real human concern for physical necessities. Jesus first uses this illustration of how God takes care of the needs of animals like birds, right? It's like, look at birds. Look how beautiful they are. They don't work, and they always have something to eat. They always have a place to stay. And look at the flowers in the field, right? People just mow them down and they're destroyed. Look at how God clothes them. And then he says this in verse 31. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father, he knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things, they'll be given to you as well. See, God knows our actual physical needs, and he'll take care of them. So instead of spending our time worrying about our needs, like he says the pagans, the non-Christians do, the people that don't have someone looking out for them, they have to worry about these. But God says, look, let God worry about all those things. Let him worry about your necessities. You spend your time, we're now freed up to pursue the lasting things of his kingdom. And Jesus tells us, if we seek his kingdom first, he'll provide all those things that we actually need, and even beyond that, to those things that we actually just want. So let me ask you this tonight. Are you guilty, like I am and like I was at your age, of pursuing possessions? Have you bought into the lie that if you just get a little bit more, you'll be happy? Jesus warned us, wealth is deceitful. It makes us think that we can only be satisfied if we just get the next name brand. But that's a lie. Remember what Jesus said. Those things are all temporary, and they distract us from what's really important. Doing work for his kingdom to store up treasure in heaven that's lasting. So what do you need to do tonight to change your focus from pursuing the treasure of this world to pursuing the treasure of his kingdom? First off, do you even have a relationship with Jesus in the first place? You can't store up treasure in heaven if you aren't even following Jesus. So if you haven't started that relationship, please, in the breakout groups, talk to your breakout group leader. Come see one of the leaders afterwards. We'd love to talk to you about that. And second, if you are a Christian here tonight, what do you need to do to shift your life's focus from pursuing earthly things to pursuing his kingdom first? What would that look like in your life right now? Let's pray. Dear Father,